yeah, I think if you take any advice from me on this, I would say, hey everybody, this is Ajene from Life with Ajene. I'm coming to you today because I have a special request to go over some of the resources that I used on my LSAT journey. So I'm gonna do that today. And shout out to you for leaving a comment and asking for more. So thank you for watching and thank you for commenting and supporting. And before I get started in the LSAT journey, I guess I also want to say thank you to all of my followers. I have 28 followers now. Long way from coming from my 3-4 followers at the beginning, which love y'all. Y'all were my day ones. But now we're at 28 followers. So thank you everybody for supporting my channel, for watching my content and keeping engaging. Please continue to keep doing that and share with friends things that you find that are interesting. All right, so back to business, LSAT resources. So how I wanna do this is I wanna just talk about the top 4 resources that I use in order of what you could call least helpful to most helpful, but all of them were helpful. So I wanna be clear, like all 4 of these resources were helpful for me. I think could be helpful for you, but I'm gonna do them in order of what I think made the most impact, and I'll explain that as I go along. So number 4 is going to be my Kaplan book. So I used on my journey a really old book. So I'm starting to study in maybe like 2022, and I used a Kaplan book from 2015 to actually get my journey going and started and familiarize myself with the test and what it was like. The reason that I used that old book was because 1, I knew that the test had not changed significantly since then, and 2, it was what I had around the house because I was actually a book that I had bought my now partner, my husband, when he was interested in going to law school. So I just used what we had around the house. It was easily accessible to me. For this piece, in terms of your own journeys, I think that it might be worth looking and seeing if your library has any kind of LSAT books or resources available for you to go and rent for free. Amazing if you can get anything that is reliable and accurate about the test for free. Check that out just to get you started and familiar. I think that could be worth it. And you can kind of see what speaks to you, what doesn't speak to you if you compare different things. So that was the first thing that I used. Great resource, just taught me the basic schematics of the test. When I took the test, it still had games, and I don't think the book was as helpful for games as it was for logical reasoning and reading comprehension, but now you don't have games. So, I mean, you can even take something that's older that addresses a test that has games on it and just focus simply on the reading, comp, and logical reasoning parts because those have not changed. To get started, again, to get started. Okay, so that's number 4, that old Kaplan book. Number 3, I used Khan Academy. So Khan Academy at the time was the place where LSAC, the people who are behind creating the test, that was where they actually had a bunch of free resources and practice tests, and you can do all of your practice for free on Khan Academy. Now today, they stopped using Khan Academy and they moved all of that over to Law Hub. So now you're gonna go to Law Hub, and Law Hub has a bunch of instructional videos, articles, and you can also practice your questions on Law Hub. So Law Hub today is gonna be where you can get free access to actual lessons and breakdowns of questions and those kinds of resources, in addition to being able to practice with some actual LSAT exams. You're going to want to practice as many actual LSAT exams as possible. I'll get to that in a little bit later. But Law Hub is the equivalent of what I use for that second helpful resource. They just moved all that stuff over to Law Hub. And with Law Hub, like I said, that you can get things for free, but if you want access to all of the tests, I think there's like around 100 tests available on Law Hub. If you want access to all of those, then you have to pay. I think it's $99 for a year's worth of access. If you have a fee waiver, then that can be included as a part of your fee waiver. I have to look over the specifics of that again. Okay, so that's Law Hub. 4, we had a Kaplan book. 3, we had Law Hub. 2, this is where I start getting into the really helpful stuff. This number 2 thing on my list in terms of a resource and what helped me get to my 173 plus was my study and accountability group. So what I did was actually, I used Reddit to my benefit by not only finding different resources like the ones I'm telling you about right now, but I also found a group that wanted to study with me. What I did was found some other people who were also on the journey, and we created an accountability group. We met every so often to just check in on how each other were doing with the process. And we also arranged sessions where we would sit on Zoom together and just work and study. And that was really good for me because having so much going on in my home where I was pregnant and I had another kid already, and there's all these moving pieces around my home, it could be kind of hard sometimes to just sit and do the work. But having a person that's also on the same journey, understands the struggle that I'm going through, and is sitting and doing the work with me, that felt really great. And most of the time for those sessions where we worked together, it was a matter of just like, that person's there, I'm here, and we're sitting there on mute and doing work. I'm studying, practicing questions on sections and things of that nature. And then it turned into something later on, which I think was where things got the most helpful. But later on what happened was we started actually going over questions that we struggled with together. And so this is where I think the most helpful piece of that group came eventually, but I think it's worth it going through the process. But the most helpful part of that eventually came from having to explain these questions that I was struggling with and explain why the right answer was right and why the wrong answer was wrong. And doing that strategy is a part of my number 1 resource. My number 1 resource is LSAT Demon. So this is where big bucks kind of come into play, but this resource is definitely worth it if you need that extra little bit of explanation, if you need that extra little bit of practice from like a structured software. This was like game changer for me. On my own, when I was just using the Kaplan book and the Law Hub resources, I got to a 166, which is amazing. I started a diagnostic of like a 148, 149, something along those lines. And so to get from that to 166, that's great in only a little bit of time. But what took me from that 166 to a 173 was that study group and study accountability partner and LSAT Demon. So with LSAT Demon, the reason why that was so helpful is because I think that they break the test down into basic language, just like your everyday language, common understanding. The explanations are really like normal language and just making it very accessible and approachable. And for me, that was something that was game changing, because before I saw LSAT Demon's way of explaining things, everything was broken down in more of a scientific kind of form and process. And that can be helpful. I like that. I think it's quirky, but I think to like be the most effective and efficient, breaking things down into like your normal everyday language was more helpful for me. Now, if you find you go to LSAT Demon and you're like, I don't really like this, I would actually like something a little more formal, a more structured kind of breakdown and technique, then you can use something like 7Sage. 7Sage is also a really helpful resource for people. I actually had 7Sage as well, and with my fee waiver, 7Sage was free. And it was helpful, and they had some explanation, like I used that as a secondary form of explanation if I didn't understand something from LSAT Demon, which was rare. But I didn't really like 7Sage as much. And the reason is because, again, it had more of that like scientific approach to it, and they also recommended a strategy in which you read the stimulus first, which is like the question, and then you go and read like the content of what it is that you're supposed to be looking at to get the answer. And I understand that approach, that's the traditional test taking approach, but I actually think that LSAT Demon's approach of reading the content first and understanding what's going on and what's being said and being able to draw out assumptions on your own and then going back into the question was way more helpful for me, and it helped me go a lot faster, because what I started to practice doing was I would read say a logical reasoning passage, and I'd say, okay, so they're saying this, and with this they're assuming these things. So I can already see the weakness in the argument, because I can already see these are the assumptions that you're making, but that's not necessarily the case, right? So that process had me looking at arguments and already being ready to take them down and say, that's flawed. And with logical reasoning and reading comprehension, what you're supposed to be doing is pointing out flaws. Most of the time, you're pointing out flaws. So I think that process is just a lot more helpful. I think that it makes a lot more sense when you think about it. And I think it makes the test way more approachable because it's something that you can do in your everyday life. I also think that LSAT Demon's drill software is really great. So if you have trouble like being able to buckle down and doing big chunks of sections and questions at a time, you can actually just do one question at a time. And that's their approach. Like, you start with just understanding one question at a time. And eventually over time, as you keep practicing, you will eventually get to a place in which you're able to do those sections no problem, because you've built up a sort of stamina. So the drill software is great. You can do that on computer. They also have an app that you can download to your phone. And that was actually helpful for me to like just familiarize it and get it LSAT studying as a part of my everyday life. And so sometimes I would just drill questions on my phone as I'm sitting waiting on things, sitting and breastfeeding, sitting and sitting with my toddler as he's playing and doing some non-screen time, or when he has screen time, like I can just go ahead and do one question at a time, which doesn't take as much focus. I think the most helpful to do the drills with for me as a parent was doing drills with logical reasoning questions, because everything's just short, right? You get a short little passage, you get a short question, and you go ahead and answer that, and those, you know, go by within a minute or less usually. And with reading comp, you gotta read that whole passage, and then you gotta keep your focus onto the questions. So it takes a little bit more time, but it was also really nice to be able to just drill questions one at a time with reading comp as well. So, yeah, I think LSAT Demon was like top-notch game changer, because it changed my mindset about the test. It changed how I approached the test, and that change in approach and mindset was helpful for me because it just made everything seem like much more common sense. And as I started to explain things, I started explaining them in a more common sense way. And that just felt approachable, it felt natural, and that's what broke me into the 170s. So yeah, I think if you take any advice from me on this, I would say ultimately you're gonna want to find what works for you, what speaks to you. I think starting with what's free can be very important and very helpful, especially if the coins are stretched, okay? My coins were stretched throughout this process. My fee waiver helped things become much more affordable. Like I said, with my fee waiver, Law Hub was free. What I didn't say though is with LSAT Demon, that was also at a discounted price. Let me go over the LSAT Demon packages, by the way. So LSAT Demon has a free version of using their software, and that's actually what convinced me to go ahead and just pay and try and actually do our whole process of applying all over again. It's because I was like, oh, I think I can do better. I can actually break into the 170s if I try this approach. But there's a free version in which they have access to just a handful of questions and tests and explanations, and you can just kind of see what the vibe is and how they break things down. I will also say on YouTube, I believe there's quite a few of their like lessons and seminars that they have, classes that you can have access to for free, and seeing how they break questions down that way as well. I would say if you go through their free stuff on YouTube and on their software, and you're like, this really speaks to me, this makes sense, I think, you know, I can get this down, I would say then it would be worth it to go ahead and pay and get access to more of their explanations and more of the content. I'll just start with just going over the different types of packages they have. So there's a live subscription that they have, in which costs the most, and it's $295. With a fee waiver, it goes down to $236 a month. So kind of steep. However, I would say if you struggle a lot with the test, their advice is to start off with just 1 month of the live subscription so you can attend their classes and you can get more one-on-one help that's live tutorish. But what you'll be doing is going to class, and then you can ask your specific questions right there in class and have them answer it. I think that that's really helpful because you can get into a classroom environment if that's something you're used to, and that helps you learn better. For me, I didn't pay for live. I didn't pay for live because I already had a 166 and I felt like I had a really solid handle on the test. All I needed was to have questions broken down for me and be able to see explanations and then be able to process that for myself and practice getting that mindset and just keep practicing until I was naturally doing that for myself. So where I actually started was with the premium subscription. The premium subscription is $195 a month, and with a fee waiver, it's $156 a month. Still steep, not as much, and I paid for that for maybe like around 6 months, I believe. I did the premium, and well worth it because they gave you all of the tests broken down, I believe. I don't know. It's just a hefty chunk of the tests are all broken down with their explanations. And when I say broken down with their explanations, I mean you can go into their website or the app, answer questions, and when you get questions wrong or right, you can go ahead and see why those questions are wrong and right by like clicking the question specifically, and there's a breakdown with answers and explanations on the side. That was all I needed. And after practicing looking at those explanations for months and going back and then practicing and trying to make sure that I can like practice that mindset for myself, that's what got me to where I wanted to be. And actually, after I got done paying for the premium subscription, I went down to the basic subscription. After I felt like I had the system of breaking things down and understanding why the right answers were right and why the wrong answers was wrong. Once I had that system down, I was like, okay, let's go down another tier to the basic subscription. And the basic subscription is $95 a month without a fee waiver, and then with the fee waiver is $38 a month, which very affordable. And so with that basic subscription, they give you a good chunk of tests with explanations, not nearly as many as with premium. With premium, I think they break them down all. Basic, they give you like, maybe like a third of the tests are broken down. And yeah, that was all that I needed. And it was helpful to have the test broken down that they did have broken down because I could just double check and make sure I was on the right track in terms of my thinking process and explaining questions. And for any questions that weren't broken down in basic at that point, that's when I used 7 Sage. And I used 7 Sage because it was free with my fee waiver, totally. And at that point, even though the 7 Sage explanations weren't as clear cut to me, I was able to kind of navigate and find my way through that still. But fair warning, if you choose that method, you gotta kind of scroll through. If you can find the right explanation, that's great, but sometimes it's just a video and then you have to scroll through the video past all this stuff of where they're like, okay, so we're gonna read the stimulus, we're gonna look for it all here, and then like, what they do that I don't like in 7 Sage is they tell you why the wrong answers are wrong, but like they tell you that by means of telling you how they could be right. Like, oh, this answer could be right if you did this, and this answer could be right if you did that, if you change it in these ways, which could be helpful for some people. But for me, that's just confusing and unnecessary information. Like, it's enough to just tell me these are wrong because of this. I don't want to care about what would make them right. I just want to know why they're wrong and why the right answer is right, because there's enough right answers to go over to be able to understand what makes an answer right. That's just my opinion. Going over, oh, this is wrong, but if you flip things this way, then it could be right. I think that just like adds complications to the test and your thought process. And I think that can lead you into more confusions as you're trying to like practice questions. Like, it'll have you tripping yourself up on some of those more complicated questions because you're like, ooh, this seems wrong, but it could be right. And I feel like it just gives you this whole like confusing gameplay in your head, and it'll have you convincing yourself that a wrong answer is right because you're like, oh, but it could be right if this, and maybe this is what they meant, versus just taking what's there at face value. And what I think the thing that breaks you into the 170s is, as a really important practice, is being able to just knock stuff out when it's wrong. When it sounds wrong, just knocking it out and getting used to that. And if you're left at the end with nothing, then it's okay to like, okay, maybe I was too strict, and then you start to slow down. But more often than not, like, just knocking something out when it sounds wrong gets you to be the right answer and gets you to be able to complete sections and do them accurately. So yeah, that's everything. If there's questions on any more of any of those specific things that I talked about for this video, definitely let me know. I'm more than happy to talk about my journey, different pieces of it, aspects of it. I just want to do those based on like what's being asked of me at this point, because I don't know, I just feel like it matters more so what you all want in that aspect, because I kind of talked about everything that I want to talk about. So yeah, if you have more that you want, questions, I can answer questions in the chat, in the comments below, or I can make more videos. It's up to y'all. Just tell me what you want and what you need. But yeah, this is what helped me get from 140s diagnostic to a 166 all the way to a 173. And mind you, I was practice testing all the way up to a 178. I just used my last attempt and didn't break that 173. So that's fine. I think a 173 is very good to go into applying to law school with. So hopefully this serves as a form of encouragement. The last piece of advice that I'll leave you with this process is just to make sure that you're putting in the practice. Give yourself enough time. Do not rush your process, and just make sure that you continue on with the practice. Because the more you practice and get into the mindset that you need to get into to familiarize yourself with the strategy for this test, the better position you'll be in, the higher scores you'll start seeing. All right, best of wishes on your journeys. Thank you for your support, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.